So in other videos that I've done on rootkits, I've spent quite a bit of time describing the various techniques that rootkits can use to cause damage and really to evade detection. And despite all of their technical wizardry, I think it's important to realize that rootkits aren't necessarily impervious to being detected. There are a number of techniques for detecting rootkits, and I think each technique has its own set of merits and its own set of drawbacks. And what I'd like to do now is perhaps a few videos that talk about these different techniques. And in this first video, let me just focus on some of the more traditional approaches, and these are not particularly great approaches, and we'll talk about more and more sophisticated approaches later, but let me kind of start with the basics. And so for starters, one can use traditional signatures to detect rootkits. I mean, there's no reason you couldn't try that. Now, as you might imagine, the traditional signatures are not perfect by any means, and some of the same limitations that apply to traditional signatures for detecting malware in general will certainly apply for detecting rootkits using such signatures. So for example, there are two conditions that you would need to satisfy for a signature-based approach to work. And the first condition is that it's going to have to be for a known rootkit. You can't apply signature technology to unknown things. So that's already a big limitation in many regards, because oftentimes malware is highly polymorphic, and you do see situations in which the same piece of malware might be packaged up in different ways for different people, and that might make it very difficult to detect a rootkit using a signature. And the second thing is that you would need to be able to identify the rootkit before it starts executing. So in other words, you can't do this post-execution. So maybe we could call it maybe pre-execution. And the reason for that is as soon as the rootkit starts running, it's going to start hiding its own presence on the system, and once it hides its own presence on the system, if it does a good job of it, you won't easily be able to find that rootkit on disk, and as such, you may not be able to find anything concrete, if you will, against which to actually compute a signature. You need to be able to find a tangible artifact on the system to be able to compute a signature and to be able to compare that signature against, let's say, a set of known signatures. And that can't happen once the rootkit starts running, or it's a lot less likely to happen once the rootkit starts running. Now, I think that, having said that, even if a rootkit starts running, and even if it tries to camouflage itself on the system, even if it does a fantastic job of camouflaging itself, the reality is that that rootkit has to exist somewhere on the system, and in particular, the rootkit really has to reside somewhere in memory. And so the other thing you can do is you can do what's called a memory scan for a rootkit. Okay, a memory scan. And you can try to actually scan the contents of memory again, this would effectively be a signature scan, but here you're going to be looking for that signature by actually scanning memory as opposed to actually trying to scan the physical disk for that rootkit. Now again, this approach, it's going to have some drawbacks, and let me talk about some of the drawbacks here. So one of the big drawbacks, again, is it's only going to work for known rootkits, right? Because you're again talking about computing a signature of some sort against which to compare things. So it's only going to work for known rootkits. Okay, and the second thing is that you have to actually be able to find the rootkits. In other words, you have to. There's many. I guess maybe the way to put it is there are many different ways to load a rootkit into memory. Many different ways to load a rootkit into memory. And you'd have to be able to actually monitor all those different ways to find the way in which the rootkit was actually loaded, right? Because if you didn't do that, you'd just be stuck in a very difficult situation trying to scan too much. And you'd have to figure out, so what are the ways in which the rootkit could have gotten into memory. And certainly, the reality is, and we call these ingress points. There's many different ingress points for a rootkit. So, for example, you would have to literally, hook. If you were trying to do this by maybe functions that might load a rootkit into memory, you'd have to literally hook a whole host of functions just to be able to understand their behaviors. If there are functions that could have been used potentially to put a rootkit into memory, and so that means you'd have to hook lots of functions, and that's already a concern. So many ingress points, you'd have to hook many functions. And on top of that, you might also run into a situation in which the rootkit could have, let's say, injected itself if it's a DLL, it could have injected itself into another running process. I mean, there's a whole, I mean, there's just actually a plethora of ways, process injections another way. And that just is kind of the tip of the iceberg. I think there's maybe, I can think of a number of other techniques by which a rootkit might try to load itself into memory besides just hooking functions and process injection. And the list just goes kind of on and on. And again, and this all just tends to assume that you know exactly what you're looking for. And that's fine if you're dealing with a known rootkit, but it's not fine if the rootkit is brand new. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a flavor of true traditional techniques, namely traditional signatures and memory scanning for rootkits. In other videos, I will talk more about other techniques for being able to detect rootkits.